All right, I said I wasn't going to make another video, but I wanted to get my thoughts out there about Elden Ring Nightreign. I really enjoyed my time with it. I've pre-ordered the game, and I honestly would keep playing the network test if it was available to me. I do have some criticism and some feedback for sure that I already relayed to Bandai Namco because they sent out a survey to us where they wanted some just specific feedback about various ABC options, where you just select an answer on a prompt. But there also was like an open section for us to give pretty lengthy feedback. I think they gave us up to like 4,000 characters, which I used all of that space because I had a lot of thoughts there based on my experience. Something I wanted to address though first is that I've seen a lot of people I think confused about what Nightreign is supposed to be. Nightreign is not another action RPG, like the other FromSoft games that you may have played. And if you're going into it thinking that it's more of Elden Ring, I think you're not going to enjoy it. Or at least it's not going to be what you're expecting. Nightreign is so much more. It is a roguelike. I think that's the intention. There's definitely some like Fortnite-y elements in there where, there's the ring that closes in. I haven't played a ton of Fortnite, so I can't speak a ton to it. But I think what struck me most is that, this is intended to be a roguelike much similar to games like Hades or Slay the Spire. And if you've played those and enjoyed those, I think you also can really enjoy Nightreign. It was a great time for me, and I really enjoyed it. So some basics background. I'm sure this is probably not. I'm not the first channel people are coming to for the lowdown of what the game is about. It's probably people that are already familiar. But if you're not, essentially it is a survival action roguelike where you have three people that go into a map. You have 3 nights or 3 days to go through and clear out as much of the map as you can to be able to level up. And at the end of every day, there's a boss. The first 2 days, you can go over the full map and everything, and you'll fight a boss as the circle slowly closes in. You have less and less to explore, and then you'll fight the boss when the circle is tightest. On the 3rd day, you just have the final boss. There's no exploration at that point. You're just in kind of like a it's more decorative than this, but essentially like an empty hallway where you have like the chance to level up and upgrade your weapon or whatever. But really, it's just a doorway leading to the final boss. I did beat the network test. I played for probably a total of like 6 hours. I got to get in for 2 network tests, not including the first one, because I played on PS5. The first network test, you really couldn't get in for very long if you were on PlayStation 5. I got in for maybe 10 minutes, and then the rest of it, the network was completely down for everybody. So you couldn't connect to a single game. But on the second and other ones, I heard it worked really well. And for me, I only had a few disconnections where I'd be in the middle of a run, and it would just, crap out on us. I think that'll happen to me once or maybe twice in 6 hours, which for a network test isn't bad. But I was pretty, surprised at the first initial test. They were completely not prepared, even though they had signed quite a few people up. But yeah, I think, again, if you like other roguelikes, like Hades and Slay the Spire, I think this would be, interesting for you, and I think you'd have a lot of fun with it. Also, I probably should have said at the beginning, this background footage here, this is not me playing. This is just, whatever FromSoft gave other outlets to be able to show. Since I was on PS5, and I think on console in general, they didn't allow you to record any footage. And so I didn't record any footage just to stay on the safe side. But anyway, yeah, so diving in, I did have a lot of fun. I think that it is challenging for sure if you're playing with randoms to be able to communicate. You can put out like a pin to say, hey, I want to go to this location and run that direction. But it's challenging to know if the person placing the pin really has any idea what they're doing. When I played, I mostly tried to find teammates that seemed like they knew what we're doing and what they were doing, and I'd follow them, and it became pretty evident in their first stop or two, okay, they know where we're headed and everything, or they don't. And if not, I tried to take the lead and say, hey, I know we should go this way. I know that the entrance to, this particular camp is over here, and that's the way to get in, and I know the boss is located here. And at the end of every, encampment that you can find, there's usually a boss, and the boss usually has a reward that is of higher value than the other stuff you can find out and about. Which is really, really neat. And I think also, the harder bosses that you fight, the better rewards there are. So I think you can fight something that's like Agil in pretty much like the ruin area from the base game of Elden Ring. Very similar fight, pretty much exactly that. There's some tweaks, I think, to the area, but overall it's pretty similar, and you get some great rewards from him. There's also some other encampments you can find, like mines. I did not dive into those, and I'll get into that a bit later, but they did not really seem to be worthwhile. And I think I could talk about the positives, but I think the positives are it's fun, it's random and a little chaotic, and it's really neat finding neat things and kind of getting on like a great run and feeling like you're gonna make it and kind of overcoming tough odds, and then having also random encounters that pop up. There's a couple of random events that can happen. And I think there's gonna be a lot more in the full release. So when I was playing, there was one where there'd be like a dark cloud sort of thing, and a bunch of flying ants will come out of it. And then also Margit can find you in the middle of the night and just attack the group. And he does not. He will teleport to wherever you are. So even if like the circle is closing in and you're running away from him, he will chase you down and not stop until you've beaten him or he's beaten you, which is really, really neat. I thought that was a cool thing. Now to kind of get into the criticism, because I do have a lot of thoughts about what I think it can do better. Number one, the ring that closes in when you're kind of caught in the rain, so to speak. So when you're caught outside the circle, it does have like a damage over time that just kind of goes continually, and it starts out kind of not so bad, and then it ramps up over time. There were a couple times where I was caught in the rain because I was trying to finish something up, and then the circle was either closing in too fast, or because of the terrain, I couldn't get back into the ring very easily, and got stuck. And sometimes my teammates would be, somewhere else. They'd be inside the ring doing something, and I was trying to, grab some whatever perk, and catch up to them. Even though maybe I took like a 20-second detour, it would take me maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes to get back inside the ring and get to them, which was a little frustrating. I think it'd be neat to have a mechanic that allows you to either zip back into the ring or to zip back to your teammates. That's like a limited use, similar to I think the Phantom Bloody Finger from Invasions in base game Elden Ring. So maybe you only have 2 or 3 that you can use for the entire session, but it allows you essentially to be able to zip back to your teammates or zip back inside the ring. So it's not one of those things where you're just like, oh geez, in general there's great verticality. And there's a great way that the players can traverse that pretty easily, but sometimes it is a little lengthy where they'll have a bunch of small rocks that you can climb up and scale a full cliff face. And it doesn't take that long, but when the ring is closing in, you can get stuck there for a long time. There's a long damage over time effect that just keeps happening, and you're using your limited amount of flasks, and you can die out there. And it just can sometimes feel a little tedious, and I feel like, there's already the kind of limited time aspect, and I think not compounding that effect would be good. Because I think it would allow more runs to feel fun and to feel that risk feel more worth the reward. I also wish there was more synchronicity between skills and just other abilities you can get in the game, and I'll explain what I mean there. So I feel like what makes roguelikes really great is when you encounter an ability and it triggers something in your brain that says, wait, can I combine this thing and that thing? Slay the Spire, I think a good example is there's a skill that you can get that essentially allows every time you gain block to deal 7 damage to your random enemy. And there's another skill that you can get with the same character that allows you to gain block for every single time you play an attack. And you're like, oh wait, can I do both of these things at the same time? Can I just make a build that's all block focused, and every single time I add block, it attacks them, and every time I attack, it adds block to me, and then it continually deals damage and compiles and adds up. And then there's another move that I can get that is an attack that deals damage based on how much I block, how much block I have. So if you have built up a high level of defense, you can do damage based on that. That I feel like is where roguelikes really shine, is that it allows you to say, oh wait, I see this thing and I see this thing. How do I combine those two things and make the player feel really clever for sorting that out? And there were a couple times where I had those thoughts and the game did not reward that. So an easy example is Royal Knight's Resolve that powers up the next attack you can do, which is a cool move and everything. And so immediately I thought to myself, wait, can I combine that with my character skill? I mostly played the Wilder, which he has 2 skills. He has one that is like a grapple hook that either can attach to the ground and zip you in that direction. or it can attach to an enemy, and if the enemy is like a boss, it will zip you toward the boss. And if it is a smaller enemy, it'll pull the enemy to you. But he also has like a powerful skill, essentially like a pile bunker, you know what I mean? Or the stake driver from Bloodborne, where it's like a big explosion move. And I thought to myself, oh geez, could I use Royal Knight's Resolve on the pile bunker? That'd be cool if I can combine those two things. And it didn't work. And I feel like roguelikes should have the player asking, can I combine these things? And the answer should almost always be yes, because it makes the player feel clever, and it makes you think, oh geez, that'd be so fun. And I also think that, in general, I think there needs to be more either Ashes of War or other abilities that you can find out in the world that, scratch that itch, that say, oh, I have a great run because I found, this effect which does this, and this combines with this other effect that I have that does that. And I don't really feel like that was present in the network test. And maybe they have that in plan for the full release. The network test for Elden Ring, which I didn't play but I saw footage of, was very different than the final release in terms of balancing. There was, of course, a lot more that was added in. There's way more that was available. But yeah, I think that in general, I think they're missing that, and I think that is the X factor for roguelikes in general, is finding really neat interactions between things that you can find out in the world or find on a particular run, and combine, and I think it creates that fun interaction. And I think having that for each of the classes, where they can find something that's unique and interesting, a couple things that are unique and interesting that create fun combinations, I think is super important to create an engaging roguelike that keeps you coming back for more really consistently. I also do hope there's more abilities than what we saw on hand. So each character has one ability that's on a fast cooldown and one that's on a longer cooldown. The one that's on the longer cooldown, it looks like it is sped up by attacking enemies. So for Wilder, he has the grapple hook that's just really quick, cooldown. You can use that, every couple of seconds. The pile bunker takes a little bit longer, and it seems like the more you're engaged in battle, the more you're attacking, the faster that powers up. I'm hoping that either A, there's more abilities that you can swap on and off, so maybe there's only 2 abilities you can have at a time, but you can swap which abilities those are. So either there's like a skill tree or something, with swappable skills, or you can upgrade the skills. Something that I found with Wilder, where I played against, there's a boss you can come across in the second night, that's the Draconic Tree Sentinel, and he has 2, horseback knights with him. And I had a run against him where I knocked one of his, one of the lesser knights off of his horse, and he's got, it's like a Leyndell knight with his, big shield and everything. And I thought to myself, oh, it'd be so cool if I can use the grapple hook to grab onto a shield and, take a shield down and get, like, some damage in. Because every time I tried to attack him, he would just put up a shield. And it was kind of just tedious when you're in, like, a high-pressure battle. You're trying to get back to your teammates and help them out, take this guy out real quick and kind of get back to them. And that combination didn't work. And that felt, I think, a little frustrating, is that he just guarded it. I think for smaller enemies, it does break their guard. But I do think that, again, the player needs to feel like, oh, I had this clever thought and it was rewarded. And so whether that's an upgrade that you want that, like, heavier and heavier enemies can have their guard broken by that, I think it'd be really smart. And I think also there needs to be more either skills or effects that coordinate between the teammates. I think there was a pretty low level of coordination I found between me and the party that I was with. Yes, there's kind of communication with, like, you'll tag a spot on the map, but really outside of that, I don't think there's a ton that you really interact with one another other than just trying to take down the same enemy. And so I kind of wish there was a bit more. I think something that could be neat is whether they, whether it's the minor skills or their kind of, longer cooldown ultimate skills that could coordinate between, 2 different characters. So, like, for instance, the Guardian has a move that strikes up like a whirlwind around him. And, as I've said, the Wilder has, like, the Pyrebunker move that has, like a big explosion. Well, geez, what if I saw, my friend who's got the Guardian, he's, doing the whirlwind thing, and I zip in and hit him with the Pyrebunker, and it has, like, a fire whirlwind or something, like Godric does with the, when he gets the dragon head in phase 2. What if something that happened, and there were things that you could discover by just, experimentation, and then, oh, well, I know that my buddy's, got his skill off of cooldown, and then more without communication, because there's no voice chat right now, we can, start coordinating, because I can see him, starting that move up, and I could zip in and do this or whatever. so far there isn't a ton of that, and I think I'd like to see way more interactions between the different characters. And so far, that isn't there. More as I'm kind of going through a list here of the thoughts that I had, and I really don't think almost all of this to Bandai Namco as well. I think there needs to be way higher HP at level 1. So the leveling system, you don't level a ton in this. You level up to from maybe like level 1 to level 15 or something. But I found anyway, even for like a combat focused class like the Wilder, you have super low HP at level 1, and even the gap from level 1 to level 2 is massive. And so sometimes I'd find myself, where I'd land in and I would go clear out the smallest camp of enemies, even without like a boss in there or really any notable loot, run back to the Grace and get just one more level so that when I went on to like a real enemy camp that has actual loot to discover, that was worth my time, then I'd be like a little bit better fared, for that. And so that, I wouldn't just randomly die there. It wouldn't be as annoying. And I think that just felt tedious because it felt like, okay, all right, I got to do this thing where I get one level and then I go to the next thing that actually matters. And I kind of wish there was just slightly higher HP at level 1, just so you can kind of get into the action immediately. Because I think that there's like smaller camps and the bigger points of interest. And I think really the game should be about going to, especially with the tight time limit, really should be focused on the bigger points of interest. To talk briefly about the bosses, so there were 2 bosses per night that we could encounter, and then one final boss on the third night. So the first night we could either fight Centipede Demon, or it was a demi-human duo. It was one of the large magic casting demi-human queens, and then there was like the demi-human swordmaster, and that was the duo that you fought. In that, I found the Centipede Demon to be way too easy. The demi-human fight was way harder, and I feel like probably the right level of difficulty, because I do feel like the first night should be, some level of a skill check before you get into the second night, and I felt like anytime I encountered the Centipede Demon, there's almost like zero effort required to clear that. It's a large enemy, it's got a lot of delays in between attacks, so you can kind of just wail on it in between. Like, yeah, he does a lot of damage, but there's not a lot of like real challenge, whereas I feel like with the demi-human fight, I think also there's even smaller adds. They don't take a ton of hits to kill, but this is way more of like an actual threat. In the second night, you can either fight off against Morgott with some additional moves and stuff added on, or you have the Draconic Tree Sentinel and his 2 buddies. For that, I felt like Morgott was the right level of difficulty, and the Draconic Tree Sentinel and his 2 buddies were way harder, at least for me when I encountered them, which is a bummer. I only encountered them once, so I never got to beat them. That was the only boss that I didn't get to beat because I only encountered it once. And I found that for a number of people that played the network test, they would either encounter like one boss, or they'd encounter the other, and they didn't see a lot in between, which is really interesting. So some people always got the demi-humans, and then they'd get the Draconic Tree Sentinel, or other people would be getting, the Centipede Demon, and then Morgott. And it always seemed to be like those 2 were lined up together, which was interesting. But I found the Draconic Tree Sentinel trio, at least when I encountered them, just to be a lot harder. And so, I don't know. It was kind of a bummer, too, because I'd also come across a bunch of really interesting, or not interesting, helpful, like additive effects that would have set me up for the final boss. Because the final boss, Gladius, which I'll get into, is a dog that does, or like a wolf with 3 heads that does mostly fire damage. And I had like a bunch of fire damage negation. Anytime I found a weapon with passive effects, with fire damage negation, I took it in preparation for the last boss. And then sadly I didn't get to go up against the last boss on that run. But even when the Draconic Tree Sentinel hit me with a fireball, I took like almost no damage. It was great. But for whatever reason, just the team I had or whatever, just couldn't clutch it out, which is kind of a bummer. I think some other thoughts that I had are overall difficulty I think is good. Like, the individual enemy camps are pretty easy, honestly, and the bosses there I feel like are well balanced. They're hard enough that like you spend some time fighting them and it's better to have your teammates there, but are doable solo so that you can like go out and do your own thing and then come back and meet up with your team. It's totally doable to do that. It feels like the right level of balance. But I do hope there's more environments. The network test we played was exclusively Limgrave aesthetic, and there wasn't a ton outside of that. From what they've shown in the footage, it looks like there are other environments, and I think my hunch is that each boss will probably have a different aesthetic to the environment that you go into. So maybe, like, I think we've seen kind of like the Nocron aesthetic. So maybe if you go after a particular other boss, where that's because you choose at the start of the campaign what final boss you're going to go after. I'm assuming that's how it's going to work. Well, that'll dictate, both the aesthetic of the world that you're in, and then also, what kind of loot that you can find, and then also, what sort of bosses you'll encounter on night 1 and night 2. Lastly, on the just random thoughts, there are smithing stones in this. I mentioned this earlier that you can find essentially like tunnels that you can go through. I never went through them because it just never seemed worth it to me, because the smithing stones, it looks like there's multiple levels of smithing stones, and it looks like not all smithing stones can affect all weapons. I had a limited time to the game, so I didn't look into it super deeply. But from what I did try, it did not really seem worth it or valuable to upgrade your weapon or necessary, which felt really superfluous. I think what they probably should do is just make one type of smithing stone that affects all types of weapons so that it's actually worthwhile, and then you can save up your smithing stones, and once you feel like you've got the weapon for the run, you can level that. Because already you're going to have like 6 weapon slots, and you're going to have to choose which one you want, and so it's already an investment to say like, hey, this is the weapon I'm going to level up. And it just feels like way too much work to try to figure out, do I have the right type of smithing stone to upgrade this? Like, I don't want to have to find like an extra level smithing stone to upgrade a legendary weapon to do the thing. It's so frantic. I think they really need to simplify that side of things. I also find it kind of annoying as I was new to the game to figure out what the different map icons meant, especially because you're just in so much of a rush trying to go from point A to point B. I would have loved it if you could just hover your cursor over a map icon. If it's a church, it says church, or if it's a fortress, it says fortress, or something like that, to be able to figure out what they are. Especially as a new player, I think that's going to be helpful to figure that out. Just because, again, it is such a crunch time, and I think they could do a little more to make it more clear. I don't know if I spoke on time frame, but from what I've heard and from what I experienced, it looks like a full game is about 45 minutes, about 15 minutes per night, more or less, which I think felt like the right amount of time. I think any more would definitely feel too long, and any less I think would feel too compressed, trying to get a full run in or get enough done during the day. So I felt like that was right. I also hope that there's more abilities that affect gameplay. I saw that a lot of people talked about one that you get where every time you rolled, it triggered Draconic Lightning somewhere, which is really neat. And I got one where it was, whenever you walked, it would, spew out flames of frenzy from your eyes. Those are really cool. I hope there's a lot more of those and a lot more ones that feel useful. The walking to spew flame of frenzy really didn't feel like it was super useful because, when are you going to, especially in this game where you're so crunched for time, you're never really walking that often. If you're a magic caster, then totally, because every time you're walking, you can walk every time you cast a spell, and you're mostly, going to be moving slowly because you're going to be in one place casting spells while other people are engaging in melee. But for me, I was playing a melee character, it was never really worth it, and the other 2 abilities I had to choose from weren't that great. That was kind of the best option. So really, it was whenever I drank a flask, I could walk slightly and have the Flame of Frenzy shoot out from my eyes for 2 shots, and both of them would miss the boss. And I was like, all right, that's not super interesting, to be totally honest. Also, I found that you kind of need to, not need to, because I didn't do it a ton, but I heard from other people that it was highly incentivized to run to all the churches as a priority and to grab as many flask upgrades, because every time you visit a church you get an additional flask that you can use. So I think you start out with maybe 2 or 3 flask uses, and then every church you visit gets an additional 1, so you want as many as you can get, because every time you rest they refill. It's neat that you can find them, but I do kind of wish that there was either some randomness to when you got them, or that there would always be a boss near the church, which from the one church that I would go to, I think I would see. No, I think we do other found churches that didn't have it, but it felt like an annoying kind of chore to throw in. And maybe I'll change my mind on that, but I did feel like it would be better not to have something. It'd be great to have less busy work, but it's more about encountering stuff, fighting stuff, and finding fun things, rather than hey, let's cross off the scavenger hunt and find as many of these things to be prepared for the last thing. I don't know. For me personally, that was my thought. Lastly, I really do hope there's more, I don't know, risk reward opportunities, I think is what I have written down here. I think they have some examples of that, and I mean, definitely in Slay the Spire and also in Hades. I think Hades, I haven't played Hades in a while, but I think you encounter chaos and you can take like a health penalty to get some things. And I mean, definitely in Slay the Spire, there's a ton of different, risk reward options where you can take a debuff and get like a much larger, benefit. And it's up to you to kind of weigh out like, hey, is this worth it? And I do hope there's more of that in the final game. I didn't really find much of any, risk reward options. And I feel like that would be really cool to say like, oh, like I can get this, like, I don't know, let's say like a 10% reduced health, but I get this much better, ability or whatever, and I have to decide for my character if that's worth it. And I would like to see some more of that, because I don't feel like, again, roguelikes, what's fun about them is, forcing you to make a decision, and then you deciding whether or not that decision's worth it or fits your build or whatever. And I think sometimes it's nice when they're not just straight, benefits that you decide if they're good enough, like, because you'll encounter different weapons and you can say, hey, does this weapon fit my build? Does the passive ability fit my build? Which is really cool, but also ones that give you a bit more risk reward. And so I don't know, maybe that's events you can discover, or like optional like side content that you can do that has some level of, again, risk reward. I think it'd be really neat. I mean, even like this is an idea that almost definitely won't get, put in the final game. But let's say you find like the Looking Glass Knight or something, and that's a boss that you can fight. Maybe there's also an event in people's worlds where you can find the Looking Glass Knight, enter his mirror, and fight other players, and either they lose the game, and are done for that run, or you do. And whoever wins gets, whatever. For them, maybe it's a final boss from the night or whatever. But for whoever wins, maybe they get some level of, perk or bonus or whatever that ends up feeling worth it. Something like that. Some, element of, getting some skin in the game. I think it'd be really fun. I think those are some of my thoughts there. Lastly, I do think there needs to be way better, communication. I heard from people that did get to play with their friends and have them and do like voice chat. They had a great time and were able to really coordinate with one another, and that's where the game really hit its peak. I didn't get to do that, and I did find that it was a little it was very hit or miss. And I think something that's going to end up happening if they don't fix that with voice chat, or some level of other, communication, which I think would be hard to do in a game like this, like text chat, I think is going to be like miserable because you're really so crammed for time. But if they don't do voice chat, if they, some level of communication so you can talk to your players, talk to the other players. Otherwise, what I do think is going to happen is that people are going to essentially make group passwords to be able to keep good players together. Already I've seen on the Nightreign subreddit, people are saying like, hey, when this game launches, let's have like a password for us to share. Because even in the network test, there were people that just either were disconnecting out of nowhere for no good reason, or really had no idea what they were doing and they were running off. And if you have a teammate that doesn't know what they're doing, the game can be a little frustrating for sure. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. I really am looking forward to the full release. I do think having some additional characters, some additional bosses, some more biomes, I think will be really interesting and fun. I did pre-order it. I really do think it's a solid game and fun, and I am glad to see, FromSoft experimenting more for sure. I think for people that have called this because I've seen some people call this a cash grab, I did not get the sense of this out of the network test. It didn't really feel like someone was like, oh, like let's just spin this around to some like dumb asset flip. Yes, there are a lot of assets reused, but yes, there's also going to be a lot of new bosses and new environments and everything as well. So far from my experience, it felt worth it. I'm excited to play it, and maybe I'll change my mind with the full release. But FromSoft has always done a good job for games I've played in the past, so I'm not crazy worried, to be totally honest. But I will be really interested to see what elements get released. And this is actually my last statement, and then I'll kind of close things out here. I do hope there is some level of post-launch support. I know there's going to be DLC where they add new playable characters and new bosses, but I do hope that they keep adding new stuff into the game, even if it's just small things like new passive abilities that you can find out in the world, to freshen this up, because I think it needs to lean harder into the roguelike side of things, where, again, finding abilities that synchronize with other things you already have or can find I think will be really important for this game to feel fresh for people. Otherwise, it is just kind of like a super, like Elden Ring on like crack or something, where you're just racing from thing to thing to thing. And while that is fun, I can imagine that getting boring for people. Anyway, those are my thoughts for the 2 people that listen to this. Let me know if you're one of the 2 people down in the comments below. All right. Bye.